I thought this was interesting. So we're gonna go over tariffs real quick. So when the Trump tariffs were first put into place, I think it was beginning of April, maybe end of March. National Restaurant Association came out with a statement. I want to read some of it. Actually, maybe I can read most of it. It predetermined, or it. The reason I bring it up is you've talked for a while about the imbalance of running a restaurant. And I just wanted to like make people aware. Like obviously this tariff plan is going to increase costs in some sectors and or in many sectors and many different supply chains. I mean, you see it across a variety of ways. Um, but I think a lot of it could impact and will impact restaurants. But I think that this was an interesting like note, and I wanted to read it, and I just want to get your thoughts. So this was published on April 2nd, and the statement reads as follows. Applying new tariffs to the scale will create change and disruption that restaurant operators will have to navigate to keep their restaurants open. Biggest concern for restaurant operators, from community restaurants to national brands, that tariffs will hike food and packaging costs and add uncertainty to managing availability while pushing prices up for consumers. Now, here's the part that I think you've been talking about a lot that I think has been missed. Restaurant operators know consumers are very sensitive to costs and have kept menu price increases to 30% in the last 5 years, while their food costs have gone up 40% in the last 5 years. So while costs have gone up 40%, the actual increase in prices has been less. It's not even matching, it's less. Restaurant operators rely on a stable supply of fresh ingredients year round to provide the menu items their customers want and expect. Many restaurant operators source as many domestic ingredients as they can, but it's simply not possible for U.S. farmers and ranchers to produce the volumes needed to support consumer demand. And obviously, we don't grow everything here. That's myself putting a quote in. Quote, during this time of change, we'll provide our members of all sizes with economic research to support their decision making and convene supply chain experts across the industry to share efforts for the best outcomes for restaurant consumers and the business viability of restaurants. So, obviously a lot going on there. I think it was very interesting though. The National Restaurant Association, came out and kind of gave the statement like, hey, like in a industry that's razor thin, there's data showing that even though prices have gone up by 40% for costs in the last 5 years, restaurants have not even matched their price increases. Your thoughts?
I think that there's just less places to hide. So it's going to come out on the P&L is just kind of the first stop point. And to, I'm trying to be empathetic here. I don't like going and having this feeling of we were able to offer this to our customers for XYZ amount of time at this price. And now all of a sudden I'm looking at what my costs are, and it is this scary situation, quite honestly, where you're like, I can't continue to keep this game going. And I think that that's sometimes a stance that business owners take, where it's like, oh, this is just temporary. It's to what people told us about inflation a couple of years ago. It's transitory. It's just going to be this little thing. As long as we can get over it, it's going to come back down. People are taking a look at what's happening in their businesses, and it's just like, man, I'm making, or even if you're thinking about building out a kitchen, like you're starting to think about another location and you're looking at equipment costs or any of these sorts of things, that ends up being this huge, like, you can't hide from it anymore.
Expansion into a second location,
Exactly.
offering new menu options that are
Yep.
higher price point, like all that stuff.
Yeah. Investing in new tools. It all starts to
Investing in your
compound.
employees.
Yep. All of this
Like,
starts to add up. And I think what is helpful about tariffs, if I may say that, you know what I mean? Like there's so many negatives that come with this. But I'm sure you saw the news that Amazon was testing certain things, and some of the Chinese retailers were doing the same, where they would have the price and then they would have the increase that was going to need to be reflected due to the tariffs included in the kind of interface that you would do when you were shopping online. And I think that in and of itself makes
which
it
is
so
great.
that it makes it less of a sting to the consumer in a way where during times like COVID, or again speaking locally to some news just to provide a little bit of anecdotal stuff, the minimum wage increases that we're seeing is something where you might not see things at your department store go up because of they're making a little bit of higher margin, and they can maybe eat, quote unquote, some of those cost increases when minimum wage goes up. But restaurants, it's like, to your point, when things are a little bit more razor thin, they don't exactly have as many levers to pull to make sure that the numbers end up working out. And so hopefully when consumers are starting to see everything go up in price, it actually gives a little bit of a permission slip to that business owner to say, this is the time. you've been putting it off for XYZ amount of time while everybody's in the state of mind of, oh, well, everything's going up. And that's the conversation that are happening at the
Just do
bars and
it.
with coworkers and in
Just
group
do
text
it. Yeah.
messages. It's just like now is the chance to raise the prices. And again, make sure that you have a little bit of that flexibility. Understanding some of the stuff that you've covered before on understanding how to cost things is incredibly important in times like this, to make sure that you don't go a whole month of not understanding that your costs have increased. And then you'll finally get to the end and realize that, man, there goes our profit. We didn't make anything this month. All this work was effectively just for break even. And then the other thing that I start to think about is starting to think about business models where you use the word decision in the quotes that you were reading and some of the context that you were adding. And I think that might also serve people well during this time. You might have a menu that is a little bit too long, and you might need to pare things down. You might have something that is operating in a way that is maybe a little bit inefficient. And some of this, it can be a forcing function to make people really take a look at the business and really start to sharpen up some of those skills and make it so that you can weather this. Or if you're the type of person who has been thinking, okay, maybe it's time for me to open my thing now, and I want it to be multiple things all at the same time, this might provide some focus. And you might say, let's try to be profitable, at least at this thing that we know that we can do well in the experience that we're providing. And so again, it feels, again, it rhymes with COVID, maybe, is kind of what I'm trying to say, where it is this kind of like external macro force that is being imposed on the industry, and how the industry decides to kind of like make its way through it, I think is going to be really interesting. Because during COVID, we kind of saw this K-shaped, discrepancy. Some businesses crushed it coming through COVID because they were able to figure out delivery, and they were able to figure out how to package stuff, and they decided to do some additional revenue streams. And with the tariff situation, I think we might also see the same thing. The people who are willing to think on their feet and adapt are going to really succeed in a world where everybody else is just kind of like, they might sit on their hands. They might, make some decisions that aren't so sound for business. And so again, it is the situation like I don't have a crystal ball. Nobody does. But I do think it is one of those situations where, depending on how adaptable you're willing to be, it's going to dictate the outcome for your business.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty smart take on the idea. Like, if now is probably the sentiment that everything's going to go up, so the sting is less. I worry about independent restaurants, of course. I feel like a chain can kind of tweak their menu, but like if someone sees your prices too bad and they don't come back, like that is a big, that's a bigger market share that you have to deal with losing.
Which is happening. I will say, like, I see people post on X of, this was all the prices of McDonald's menu items in 2018. And then 7 years later, this is what they are now. And you're seeing things like this menu item used to be $1.29, and now it's $3.69 for this menu item. And so it's like a 3x in price. And I think that's at a much larger scale. They have tons of consultants that probably come in and do the work to try to make sure that they're sourcing things in whatever way it needs to be done. But, we're hopefully seeing, with AI and some people getting jobs that are a little bit more higher paying, the guest is maybe making a little bit more money, as you're starting to see certain people get roles and responsibilities. And some of these tech companies have huge valuations. I'm not saying tech companies are the only ones that eat at restaurants, but I think it is one of those funny things where people still need to eat 3 times a day. And so how are they going to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to follow up, the National Restaurant Association put out a report on April 10th on menu prices. And this I found interesting is that year over year, full service menu prices have climbed 4.1%, and for like the last for March, menu prices rose 0.4%. So that's and that was a second consecutive monthly gain. So I think for me, I really want to see April's data and track that. Or how are restaurants managing this? Are we raising prices? Because while prices are going up, obviously consumer confidence is going down, and they share that here. And what are sales looking like? Their reports so far haven't shown much. Obviously, the tariffs really started to kick in May. There were some in April, but some in May as well. And yeah, I am worried. I think they're going to be very damaging to independents. I think they're going to be very damaging to a lot of people's livelihoods in the restaurant industry, and I do worry about their impact. I don't think they've been really executed on well, and I think the NRA, the National Restaurant Association, and many others agree with that. I know Jose Andres has been putting out a lot of good works.
Yep.
We'll see, but it's something I just wanted to track in your thoughts. But
yeah,
just the idea that And you look at it two ways. You look at it as like the flaws of the business model, but you also look at it of like we're in the hospitality industry and you have owners trying everything they can to still serve their customer base and not raise prices too much. And I almost like wonder what's the big marketing campaign? What's the big messaging to consumers that faces consumers and say, look, you have been underpaying for food for way too long at restaurants. And obviously everyone's stretched thin right now and everyone's having those issues. But at the same time, like these businesses may become, they may not be viable in certain ways or in certain regions due to these things. So I am very worried about that and appreciate your thoughts on it and kind of like the upside look that you could take as well. So.
Well, I mean, maybe this is a different angle. I'd be curious to hear if this lands with anybody who's listening. But it's almost like we saw a couple of, there's some folks that I've interviewed on the show. I think you've had them on too, who have done pieces that really deep dive a sandwich at a small independent location. And they go through line item by line item, dictating exactly how much that thing cost, what the labor was on it when you're calculating waste, all into account. This is the price that we're selling for, which is a reasonable price for a sandwich. And look, we're actually losing money, quote unquote, on this menu item. And if that struck a chord with consumers and the market strongly, don't you think that it would turn into a situation where everybody would throw up their hands and say, oh, please change the price. Please raise this for me. You put out all the data. You clearly aren't scamming me on this sandwich. Like, I want you to be able to stay open and but yeah. I don't know if you found this, but like, it didn't do anything. Like, yes, to the person who already thought that food was underpriced and all of these sorts of things. And I come back to that and I say, well, maybe more education about what the costs are doesn't actually do much to the consumer. And the angle that I wanted to take and that I wanted to get your thoughts on is maybe what it actually needs to be is people need to charge what they need to charge. And what actually needs to happen is you need to bring the value up to the price that you're charging. Yeah. And this comes back to something I've been frustrated about with a couple of the dining experiences I've had lately, is service is just lackluster, or the execution is just incredibly inconsistent. And if you're going to go out with all these higher prices, the last thing a consumer wants to feel is that like it wasn't worth it. And so maybe it's not being a spreadsheet junkie or going out and getting a contract with one of your vendors to get preferential pricing. It's actually this thing that, yes, it costs money because you need to train people and maybe you need to institute some new steps of service or whatever. But you use the word hospitality as you were bringing some of those points up. And it's like, maybe that's what we need to see more of, not like we raise the prices and we increase the hospitality. Does that get us to a place where people are actually happy when they go out to eat because it is actually different from getting DoorDash delivered to my house? And yeah, I'm happy to pay $25 for this thing because it is such a good experience. I've been harping on this word on so many podcasts that have been going on, is like, experience is everything. Like, can we improve the experience? And then maybe that might not completely mitigate the problem. You're still going to have that sting, especially from your regulars. So the people who have been coming to your place for years and all of a sudden your $11 thing went up to $18. But now you can confidently say as the owner, I'm charging what I need to charge. I'm making my margin on this. And I'm making sure that everybody in the organization now knows that we need to back up this price. We need to make sure that we're delivering on this thing that we're charging for, as opposed to, what I've certainly experienced lately, which is this just kind of like mailing it in, here you go, take it, and see ya.
Yeah. Yeah. I think both parts of that equation are probably, and I think the experience thing is going to be big. And I'm going to kick my other story to you and then Please. I'll let you round out the episode.
But because I only have one more left. So you.
Same.
Yeah, okay.
But I think it ties into this, but real quick, I'll leave the link in this, restaurant.org, restaurant performance index remains steady in March. So I look at this report every month. April, we're going to find out how we're doing.